For those of you who've been to any of our other Products That Count events, you know that this is not our standard operating procedure. Salad and pizza is more like it. So I know this feels unnatural, but this is the new normal at our San Jose campus. So thank you, eBay, Tony, Kamal, etc. And they are also hiring. Who are the folks from eBay here? You can just raise your hand. All right, so any of you guys who are looking for your next opportunity, just grab one of the eBay folks here and chat with them. And then Tony is going to give us a little bit of a shout out for eBay.
Welcome everyone, welcome. We're excited to have you here at eBay again. For those of you who have been here before, for those of you who have not, welcome for the first time. We raised the bar on the food. Yes. I'm sorry, I'm a foodie. I love good pizza and salad, which is not in me. I have a lot of exciting opportunities available at eBay. We're hiring all over our core product and technology organization. So if you are into UX, if you are an agile person, we're a super agile organization. You gotta say that 3 times fast. And so if you are in engineering, if you're into data science, if you are into UX, we might have a home for you. So make sure that you do tap one of the eBayers, raise your hand. Make sure you do tap one of the eBayers so we can at least make sure we get your information so that we can tap you for future opportunities. All right? I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation.
Thanks, Tony. And then we also have a couple of other sponsors. Is there anyone from Amplitude here? No? All right. Yeah, Amplitude is marketing, mobile marketing, analytics suite. So check them out. They're one of our sponsors both here and in San Francisco. And then there's mParticle. Anyone from mParticle here? No? All right, so they're one of our other sponsors, both for San Francisco and San Jose. So thanks to our sponsors, but thanks to all of you for registering and showing up here. So with that, we have our speaker, Donna Boyer. And Donna came here from San Francisco. She's currently with Stitch Fix. Prior to this was at Airbnb and Yahoo, and did I miss any?
Okay. I'm going to be really still so I don't trip, because that won't go. Hi. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm really excited to be here. Really excited to be talking about roadmaps because it's kind of strangely one of my favorite topics. I love this size group because it means that we can ask a lot of questions and really get in depth on projects or on topics. So I'm going to talk for 20, 25 minutes or so and then leave a bunch of time for Q&A. But feel free, if you have a question in the middle of it, just doesn't want to wait till the end, just feel free to shout something out. We can try to keep it a little bit more interactive that way. See if I can figure all this stuff out. So a little bit about me. I've spent the past 25-ish years leading product management teams. I still wake up every day feeling like it is the best job ever, and I can't believe how lucky I am to have literally fallen into it. A ton has changed since then. I've been in big companies and little companies and consumer companies and B2B companies, and there's all sorts of things that there's differences between those, but the biggest thing that has changed is just becoming more and more agile, becoming more and more mobile.
Hold the mic a little
Sure.
bit closer, just to make that.
Okay, can you hear me? Better? Okay. I think the big constant has been roadmaps. And the kind of the dread and the pain and the questions that go along with roadmaps. Completely process independent. The challenges and our jobs as product managers is really making sure that we're just maximizing the value, like delivering whatever impact you can in the shortest period of time, somehow boil down to this sheet of paper, digital or otherwise, that represents what you're doing. And that's it's a challenge, and it's always been a challenge. It might always be a challenge. So what we're going to talk about today is really how to make that process a little bit easier, how to make it a little bit more magical for, most importantly, for your customers, and through your customers, then driving impact for your business. So I am currently at Stitch Fix. I've been there for about 3 months. Prior to Stitch Fix, I was at Airbnb, where I led the host side of the business and the launch of their new product line, Airbnb Plus. So I'll use examples throughout from both of those experiences, since I haven't done much in my first 3 months at Stitch Fix. A lot of them will be more Airbnb anecdotes. But feel free to ask me also any questions about specifically how did you handle this situation. And probably a lot of these situations that I've been in whether it's startups or big companies or the Airbnb examples can be applicable to situations that you've had or are experiencing there too. So before I dive into it, quick show of hands, how many people in the room are product managers? Like almost everyone. Designers? All right. Engineers? Okay. And how many people are involved in the road mapping process at your company? How many people like the road mapping process at your company? Wow, that's like way more than usual, so that's good. That's great. Okay. I mentioned at Stitch Fix, I spent my last 2 days going through all of these roadmaps, and this goes only up to 10 in the morning. It was just a full day yesterday. So this is really, really top of mind for me. I've been spending a lot of time over the past couple of weeks talking about roadmaps. I've been there for 3 months, so it's a brand new team. I think what's remarkable is that it's a team that never had product management before. So it's the first time really we're introducing a lot of these topics. And what really strikes me is road mapping is not a concept that really comes naturally to a lot of people. It's really about, how, especially when you're trying to just prioritize lists of things, the more common thing is really kind of figuring out how do I prioritize, how do I manage stakeholders, how do I make everyone happy, and how do I make everything fit. It's really easy when you are challenged with all those things to forget about the fact that you really, in all of that, it's really easy to lose the special sauce and the things that make things really special. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, starting with really what is a roadmap, right? In its simplest terms, there's all sorts of buzzwords, there's all sorts of verbiage that gets used about roadmaps, but really simply put, it's really a living document that outlines how you get from point A to point B. Like, that's it, right? This is a roadmap, right? It's a picture of my office in San Francisco, and here's where we are right now. And just like any other roadmap, there's multiple ways to get there that are kind of the same. This one is 2 minutes longer than this one. You end up in the same place. There's no one right path. Just like any other roadmap that we work with at work too, these estimates are wildly off. It does not take an hour to get here from San Francisco. Like, it's not true, right? And so I think, the important thing is, like, in real life, like, it really is about going from here to there. Our job as product managers or engineers or designers or as a product team is really about figuring out the same thing. But what gets lost in the roadmap thing is really, why are we doing it? What's the point of doing a roadmap? And what does it do, not just from the point A to point B in terms of your product and your value that you're providing, but internally, what does it do and how do you use it as an internal tool? So Product Plan, which is a software that manages product roadmaps, did this pretty interesting survey in 2015 of like a few thousand product managers to bubble up what the most important reasons to do a product roadmap are. Number one by far was communicating product strategy. 2, planning and prioritizing products and features. 3 was reaching consensus on product direction, like really using it as a tool to make sure that you're smoking out the differences and making sure that everybody was on the same page. Communicating milestones, like what's going to be done by when, what can we expect, and then managing backlogs. Right? That realistically, like that's a tall order to do all in one document. Right? And so when you have all of these expectations, it makes it really hard to find the right system or to find the right way to do all of that at once. I did pretty regularly when I'm in the midst of roadmap season, I fall temptation to fall to the product management tools search, because it's just like when I get struggling with my to-do list, I just decide that I must need a new to-do list software. Same thing with roadmaps, right? There's got to be some silver bullet out here. If you Google product management or product roadmap software, you find something that scrolls down pages and pages and pages, looks like this. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of different software programs that manage product roadmaps. In each of those pieces of software, there are at least one, but usually up to 5 different techniques for prioritizing. There's prioritization matrices, there's backlogs. It's just endless. And it just goes on and it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. The reality is, just like managing your to-do list, there isn't a tool that solves this for you. Right? And so you can spend all sorts of time doing it, but the real thing is it's really about choosing wisely, choosing the priorities, and kind of sticking with it. Really, there's nothing wrong with doing your roadmap in Google Sheets. Nothing. It might look prettier if you use one of these tools and you have these little arrows and diagrams, but there's really nothing wrong with it. Kind of a quick show of hands. Does anyone have a tool that they particularly have found that just solves it for them or works for them? Yeah. How many people are using Google Sheets or Excel? Oh, we are. Right. Okay. I feel bad for all of these companies, right? Like it makes it really hard because it's really hard to get unstuck from that. If you're using a spreadsheet, something like this might look familiar. Stack ranking and stack ranking based on relative value, relative effort, relative lots of other things. This is a really common way of thinking about roadmaps. The challenge with this, and this is a conversation that I've had many, many times over the past couple of weeks as I transition with our team, is this isn't a roadmap, right? It's a list. It's a list that accomplishes a couple of the things on that map, on that list. It gives you a way of ranking things. It can help you build consensus, and it definitely organizes stuff, but it doesn't tell you how you're going to get from point A to point B, right? It doesn't do that at all. So it really fails on the primary goal of having a roadmap. What it does do is it kind of gives you, frankly, a way of justifying what you are doing and what you're not doing, because you've got all these decimal points, and you can say, well, this one is 2.5 and this one's 1.4, so that one's therefore more important, right? While it does a good job justifying, what happens is you usually don't end up producing much at all. Right? You can check a lot of boxes and you can end up stoplighting, like is something green, red, or yellow, but at the risk of being really melodramatic, it's kind of a roadmap to kind of nowhere. And yeah.
On the previous slide, how do you come up with I don't know what they are, the feature weights, like relative benefit, relative penalty, total value? What's your recommendation for, like, if people want to come up with like a value prioritization framework, right? How do they arrive at these things and justify?
So the question was, how do you arrive at this type of ranking, and what do you choose, and how do you do it? My real answer is don't do it. Don't do it. And here's why. No matter what you put in there, it's wrong. It's wrong. You don't know. I mean, it's a very wonderful false sense of security when you've got, 4.3 or 6.5, but it's not right. It's not right. And so what happens is, and it's an easy trap, and I've seen team after team fall into this trap, is that it gives you a way of really feeling like you've got this down to a science, right? But you don't have it down to a science. You don't know what the cost is. You have no idea what the cost is. There's that great Quora post. I don't know if you've seen it. I forgot here about why does it always take 2 times to 3 times longer than you've estimated. And it gives us an example of walking from San Francisco to LA. And it starts by saying, taking an approach where it's like, well, I can walk, just divide how many miles it is by how many miles you think you can walk in a day while you're walking around, San Jose. And then you set off. I'm like, okay, I've got this. And then you're walking, and you realize you're not out of the city. Yeah, you're like, ugh, right? And, you don't plan for the hills or the red lights or the fact that, there's cliffs as you're going down, or freeways, or things that you can't cross. And really, the only way you can estimate it is to have done it before, right? And so this is not accurate. the value is not accurate because you don't know if there's product market fit across any of those things. And if you look at what's being prioritized across these things, this is, by the way, this is just a picture. Like, this is not my picture. I borrowed it from someone else. But if you look at all these things, they're kind of apple to oranges trade-offs, and it's not in any way kind of customer focused at all. So really what happens is, typically you'll get this list of features that come in from across the organization, and there's all these stakeholders, and you're trying to balance the stakeholders, and then suddenly you have decimal points, right? And decimal points are like, well, see, look, we're doing this. But what happens with this is, first of all, it doesn't have any sense of strategic direction. There's nothing in here that communicates where are you trying to go. The other thing about this is, even if you were right about this, I will put money on the fact that each one of these things, when they're being scoped, is the absolute bare minimum, because you are completely incentivized for your cost decimal point to get it down to the smallest possible bit. But your smallest possible bit, if you're hopping from one kind of MVP-ish thing to another MVP-ish thing, is never going to deliver a lot of value, and is certainly never going to deliver a lot of delight, because it's just not finished. So I think that's a long way of saying don't. This approach almost always is suboptimal. It's okay. There are certain situations where it works, where what you're trying to do is, you're in something that's really kind of more of a service organization, and you're trying to figure out what's the most efficient way to work through tickets. Sometimes it works in terms of delivering like value or points out to an organization. But outside of that, when you're delivering software for customers, whether it's business or consumer, it's not an effective. It's a great spreadsheet, but not an effective way to deliver a magical product. It will almost always fall short of expectations. Expectations, usually your own and your own team, but pretty much always your exec audience and your customers. All right? And so when you do that too, the math with the formulas pretty much regularly will work out so that you're delivering medium-sized projects with a medium-sized impact. Right? And you just can't win if you are just medium all the time. Like, medium just doesn't win. There's nothing special about it, right? It just becomes also, it takes you out of the equation, right? If it were something that could just be really about decimal points and just about an Excel spreadsheet formula, we don't need any of us. Right? Because what we really need to be doing is exercising judgment and having and marrying data and user research and instinct and common sense. And if it's really just about the numbers, you could just put it in and put it out, right? And that's why, if you take yourself out of the equation, you're not doing yourself or your team justice. Right? So then the question is like, well, what do we do? Like, how do we change it? The biggest single piece of advice I have in this is start your roadmap with your destination in mind. Like, just think about like, where are you trying to go, right? The word vision sparks lots of debates lots of times about like, what is a vision statement and what is a mission statement, and you can rat hole into offsites for hours talking about that. Is it a mission? Is it a vision? Is it a doesn't matter. Really, if you think about it very, very simply, just where are you trying to go by when, right? And at different levels of seniority or different size organizations, it might look really different, right? It really might look like, you want to deliver a certain set of features to users by the end of the year, or it might mean that you want to launch a completely new product line within 3 years. It doesn't matter as much as what matters is that you and your core team are just bought in on what it is that you're trying to do, to the level of which you can kind of feel it and taste it. Like, it has that much color and that much definition for you, so that everyone knows where you're going and you're going in the right direction. So just going back to that roadmap, like, I'm going to the eBay headquarters, like, good enough, right? That's where I'm going. I don't need to have it be more elaborate than that. It just has to be concrete. So then once you have your vision, and this is where the spreadsheet fails, right? What you want to do is work backwards and create versions of your vision, right? And this is, I'm very deliberately not using the word MVP here on purpose, because there might be lots of little MVPs in here. What you really want to be thinking about is this can be, this could be 5 years out, it could be 3 months out. You just want to be thinking about what are my steps to get there that might be unrelated to each other, but they are good, they're good milestones along the way, where you've got something concrete and real, where if you do those things in this order, you'll be able to achieve that vision in that order of time. Why this is important is if you're just talking about MVPs along the way, you'll never do things like re-architectures that might be important for you to be there. You'll never do things like extensive redesigns. You're always going to be doing like MVP, MVP, bare bone, bare bone, bare bone, and bare bones don't usually have you achieve your vision. So I'm not saying be bloated with features. I'm saying like, hey, like let's just start with where is it that you want to go, and then from that point start thinking about, well, I'm going to back myself into it rather than going this way forward. Because if you start with version 1, what typically will happen is you'll have to have 15 versions to get to the vision, because you're forgetting about all the pieces along the way. If you work backwards, you figure out the chunks and the prerequisites a lot more accurately than if you iterate forward. And just do the exercise with your team, spend some time thinking about like, all right, what are really those steps that we'd have to take to get there? Super rough, super rough. So I just did this, I had an offsite with my team last week, and we just, everyone put a stake in the ground for where they want to be across all their across all my teams at the end of, in a year from now, at the end of our fiscal year 19. And then worked backwards for like, okay, wait, what that means is by the end of Q3, we have to be here. And there was a whole lot of wishing for pencils, because people were just kind of dashing, we had little worksheets, and people were just dashing it into there. And then it was like scribbling it out, like, oh, wait a minute, we forgot to deal with that. So if you think about working backwards, you really can think about what are the pieces that are really critical for that. So then, once you have that, this is when the rocks and pebbles and pixie dust comes, right? So you're here, you've got your versions leading up to your vision, and then you start with version 1. I blatantly took this idea of rocks and pebbles from this concept, this time management concept called the jar of life. And the jar of life is about managing what's important in your life more proactively. And the big rocks are faith, family, and friends. Okay? I am not known for having good work-life balance or balancing my life and my time. Like, it is not the reputation I had tried, but I'm not very balanced. So I fully recognize the irony of me taking this and applying it to product management. Like, it's just, I just kind of stole this life, but it works for roadmaps. So if you're thinking about roadmaps, what you really want to be doing is prioritizing your big rocks first. If you think about a jar and you think about, okay, if you put your little stuff in first and you fill it up with a bunch of gravel, the big rocks just don't fit in on top of that gravel. But if you think about this metaphor where you're taking the big things and you're putting them in the jar first, they fit better because they're not stuck with a bunch of gravel and sand around them. So what are those big rocks? Those big rocks are the things in your version 1 that are your strategic bets. Strategic bets are bets. They're bets. They don't fit in your matrix. They don't fit in that decimal weighting because you don't know. You really don't know. But they're things that could transform your business, but they're risky. So think about what those are and put them in your jar. Think about the things that really you feel like will move the needle with confidence. Those are things that, just to give you a Stitch Fix example, at Stitch Fix, we have some issues with site performance right now. I'm fairly confident that if we improve our site performance, we'll see an improvement in conversion, just because there's a lot of industry research on that. I don't think that we would behave any differently. But there's a lot of work that has to happen for us to address some fairly fundamental reasons why that's the case. Big rock. I would also put any sort of significant tech debt in there, the things that usually don't see the light of day in that prioritization matrix because they're not coming in from a business partner is not typically going to say, okay, deal with the tech debt, right? And so the things that are really going to help you set yourself up for the vision, but also deliver value in that first phase are all your big rocks. And just make sure you're carving out room for them, because if you don't carve out room for them now, you're never going to be able to carve out room for them later, and it's going to get harder and harder and harder for you to actually make time for them as you go forward. So then you have your big rocks in the jar. Actually, before you have your big rocks in the jar, I'll give you an Airbnb example. So at Airbnb, when I was running the host side of the business, we have, there's an Airbnb app. And for hosts, unlike for guests, when you're booking something when you're traveling, it doesn't really matter as much that there's an app, because a lot of times you'll just use mobile web, or you'll do it while you're watching TV. You'll just book a place to travel. But when you're a host, is anyone here an Airbnb host? Okay, I'm an Airbnb host now. You're doing it all the time because you're checking someone in, or you're responding to a message, or you're updating your calendar on the go all the time. Well, our hosts are telling us that our app, they couldn't trust it because we were losing messages. And it was true. Like, messages they were just disappearing. I don't know where they went. We still don't know where they went. They just wouldn't make it. They got lost in the ether between being sent and coming to the app. So we had to do this really big re-architecture. There are three things. We had to address the performance. We had to find these messages, and we had to redesign the calendar, right? None of those things, we scoped them down as small as they could. None of those were very exciting, but they were definitely things that were keeping us from hitting our goals on the app for sure, because people weren't using it. So those are examples of big rocks. They're also examples of things that, had we done the ranking, would show up on that list. They're both kind of medium to large cost, medium to large impact. They would have bubbled up to the top of any ranking matrix we used. But those are our big rocks. Drop them in the jar. Like, we actually did that, literally. We went through and we're just like, okay, we're going to put these in this jar, and they're our big rocks. We wrote on ping pong balls. Next thing was identifying the pebbles. The pebbles are things that are, if you're using Agile or if you're using backlogs, are the things that typically fall below the line. They're the things that you want to do, but with your confidence line drawn, they're just not making the cut, right? But you want to do them, and you know they're important. So those tend to be things like quick hits, some things that are really important things for another team, but you just can't find the time to get them done. They're small. Now, the reason you can get these done, and this goes against kind of conventional wisdom, right, is that you're not linearly going through your backlog. You're sprinkling these things in so they're filling the cracks. Right? And this is a conversation that's really important to have with your engineering teams, where it's like, sometimes you just, you finish a big rock and you just want to break, right? You're not ready to start the next one, or maybe the next one isn't ready to be started. Like, designs are still in flux, or there's some questions about some requirements. But if you can grab a small pebble and get it done and have it fill the crack, you just get more out of your team. You get more accomplished than if you were just to keep going down your spreadsheet ranking, right? So you're just filling up the cracks in between with some undefined number of pebbles that fit in, right? Does that make sense to everyone? Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So, how do you talk a little bit about the process around how do you identify the big rocks and the pebbles, right? I mean, there's a lot of debate around, depending on who you talk to the organization, say, hey, this is a big rock versus this is a big rock.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you align people on the big rocks?
Yeah. So aligning on the big rocks is not that different than, it's an excellent question. If you were to think about this list, right, minus the rankings. Usually what you can do is think about, we do things like voting on big rocks, like just simple, if you're all in one place and you're not remote, like just put them all up on a sticky board and then just put stickers next to them. What I found, and just to take this analogy like one step further, is that the big rocks are actually fairly easy to align on. If you get this concept across and you're just talking about like, and you start with the working backwards from revision to the version, there tends to be way more alignment than I ever would have expected around what are the actual important big rocks to put in the jar, in a way that is really counterintuitive, especially if you're used to dealing with having to rank things around decimal points. The metaphor somehow works in a way that people understand. It doesn't work if people are trying to get kind of their thing in. Right? The thing that's really critical is starting with that vision and working back. Because when people have more visibility into where you're going and what the kind of the steps have to be in order to get there, and they've bought into that, the rock part is easy. So if you can align on the vision and the versions, then there's much more of a shared understanding of what the rocks are. If you're starting from a standpoint, so if I were to take this analogy, I don't really know what to wrap around this as a vision, like some like winning tool that does all these things, right? And then we're going to say like, okay, we're going to handle productivity tools in our first version of that. If I were to say, okay, productivity tools would be the first version, some of these just don't fit, like desktop access, not a productivity tool. So it cuts down the debate because you've essentially established the concept of themes through those versions, and then it works. So it's really a shift in mental model away from stack ranking and establishing numbers to just making sure that people have clarity on where you're trying to go.
So it's quite intuitive and interesting to get quickly identify pebbles between one version and the next version. It's easier to do that than to do the trade-off, because when you're during that cycle, when you're trading off between pebbles and the rock, pebbles may fall off, or you may think that, hey, this rock is not doable in this time frame.
Yeah.
So let's just get ahead with quite a few pebbles. So kind of trade-offs become more kind of in the play than really the real goal or the real priority.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll come back to that. I have a slide on that because that's important. Like, what's really different about this is you've moved away from the concept of kind of linear trade-offs, and you're just shoving more stuff in the jar. So the art of it is figuring out what can you fit in the cracks, and that really has to bring the whole team in and being aligned around what do you fit in the cracks. But that's really where, like, if you take it one step further and you start thinking about Pixie Dust, right? Pixie Dust, totally separate list, totally separate process. Pixie Dust is something that you come up with your team. It helps, like sometimes it's just like that meeting where you are playing ping pong or we have beer or you're just sitting around and you're coming up with a list of things that are surprise and delight. Pixie Dust, I have found, very often comes from your design team. Animations, great Pixie Dust. They are things that are very, very easy to implement, but they are things that people really want and have a big surprise and delight factor. Pixie Dust will never in a million years make it onto your ranked list. If you think about how often, if you've thought about like fancy animations or really interesting design approaches, I bet every one of you has had that experience where it's like, well, we'll just cut that. That doesn't have any measurable value, right? But those are the things that really make your product great. The problem with stack ranking is they don't rank, right? They'll never rank, and it's kind of irresponsible to rank them in that. But if you can figure out a way just to sort of sprinkle some dust and make it okay for your engineers, or your engineers paired with designers, to just grab a little dust when they have time and sprinkle it in there, that is a really good example of that. So an example, going back to the Airbnb example, one of the pebbles that we did in this app was these message templates. So when you're a host, you write things up in your description, and then you find yourself rewriting them over and over again. How to get into your house or your house rules. So it's really handy. What we did is we just parsed those and we made them be message templates, and then you can just insert them as a message template into your message threads. And that was a good example of a pebble. It wasn't that important, but it was really convenient, and it added just productivity to hosts. Didn't move any real metric in any meaningful way. It was just people were happy about it, right? But the Crowdpleaser, the Pixie Dust factor, was we let people take a photo from in the app. They didn't need to take a photo in the app. They had been able to insert a photo, but being able to take a photo in the app was literally like, I don't know, a couple hours of work, if that. When I introduced this, we had a big event every year, every 2 years. Introduced this at the Orpheum Theater in LA, like 3,000 people were there. Got a standing ovation for this. That is like the closest I will ever be to being a celebrity. It was super weird, right? Pixie Dust, right? It was something that an engineer just thought, hey, this would be cool. It's a native app. It's super easy to do. Why don't we take more advantage of the platform? Done. Those are the types of things that you want to look for, because you want a standing ovation. Like, getting a standing ovation is really cool. Like, it's very rare that you actually get it in real life, I think. But getting it from your users is really important. And it's the things that make your products really work. So just to wrap this up quickly, your question was really about balance, right? There is no magic and there is no formula. At least I haven't found one yet. I think the thing to think about, like how many rocks, how many pebbles. Best advice I can give is think about the size of your jar and actually try to envision it. If you think about like, okay, I've got a jar that's this big, right? And that's usually a combination of how big is your team, how much time do you have, how big are your rocks. You can kind of get a sense of what are the really important things, and then just kind of use judgment and talk about it with your team. And if you think about, and if you start kind of using this language with, hey, can we sprinkle in some pixie dust, or are there some small rocks that we can put in there, it tends to kind of work itself out. So the most important thing is that you are doing the things that are big rocks. The big rocks are the things that the organization is counting on you to do. They're the things that would be stacked ranked top of your list. But then beyond that, can you figure out what else you can get done, both the pebbles and the pixie dust? And what's important about that really is that it is the stuff that makes your product really sing and feel really magical. So just to kind of extend that roadmap metaphor one more time, there is actually a road called the Magic Road in Sweden. I didn't know this. I found this on the picture. This isn't, I think it's really hard if you think about changing your whole process to this. I wouldn't recommend you go back to work tomorrow and say, we're totally changing our process to rocks, pebbles, and pixie dust. What I would recommend is you try this concept, right? If you just start introducing the language on top of whatever process you're using today and start thinking about, is there pixie dust? Are there some pebbles that we can put in here that you can sprinkle in on top of what you're doing? It makes a huge difference in what you release, and it gets away from kind of that feeling that I think is really easy to get of we're constantly delivering the minimum. Like it's minimum, 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 and we don't ever really go back to do it. So totally encourage you to try it. I also really want you to let me know how it goes, right? Like just like Twitter's up there. I'm really bad at tweeting, but I will respond to people if you direct message me on that. So thanks for that. We have time for questions, I think. I can't tell because this timer's not working. We're good? All right. Thank you.
Since we are recording the event, we will have a couple of mics. So Ginger will take this side and I'll take that side. So just raise your hand and we'll come around with a mic. And I guess we'll need to, that one.
Yeah. This one's just the recording one. I'm going to trip. Ooh.
All right. Come on. All right. You guys can have close. I'll be back. All right.
First of all, thanks for the talk. so you're a public company, and I was wondering, when you look at your big rocks versus the needs of the business that are not necessarily the needs of the users or the product, and those are misaligned sometimes. When you're looking at keeping the lights on and your growth goals versus the things that you have to keep.
Yeah, so the question was really, so Stitch Fix is a public company. We went public in November. And so, yeah, we have to, there's real deadlines and things that have to happen and real growth goals that we need to hit. But I think, it's very much the same if you're a small company too. I mean, the consequences are sort of different, but I think everyone kind of shares that same sense of responsibility. So the question was really, how do you balance things like growth versus, we have a lot of really important things to do around warehouse operations, for example. What I definitely do that is I actually split the teams. And so I have